This episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast is brought to you by the Renewed Spirits event, an evening with Elizabeth Smart at the Marriott Conference Center in Florence, Alabama on September 28, 2021. You may remember that Elizabeth Smart was set to graduate middle school in 2002 when she was abducted from her home in Salt Lake City, Utah, and held captive by a husband and wife. She was chained to a tree in a campsite just miles from her home and endured atrocities. However, this was a rare horror story with a happy ending, as the clues led to her safe return less than a year after her disappearance. Elizabeth will be sharing her story of hope, healing, and never giving up. Through this traumatic experience, Elizabeth has become an advocate for change related to child abduction, recovery programs, and national legislation. Elizabeth triumphantly testified before her captor and the world about the very private nightmare she suffered during her abduction, which led to conviction. General admission is $50 per person. Sponsorships are also available. Call 256-335-4062 for more information or check out the links in the show notes. Proceeds from this event will benefit Renewed Spirits, a nonprofit that offers quality mental health services to underserved clients. Renewed Spirits will defer to local, state, and national guidance if COVID-19 cases dictate in September. We plan to be at half capacity and masks will be required to attend the event.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor podcast with Ben and Travis. We are glad that you guys are with us today. And Travis, hope that your week is going well. Everything going good with you?
Man, I'm doing great. Can't really complain about being tired when we have Scott Keiser on the show.
That's exactly right.
Who's on his way to Valdosta, Georgia, from the New Orleans area after doing some cleanup. But we're happy to have Scott Keiser on with us. Obviously, we wish it was under better circumstances. But Scott, how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm tired. I'm exhausted, but I'm good. I'm alive. That's the most important thing, and I still have my family, so all is good.
Awesome. Yeah, we are thankful for that, and we will apologize a little bit. The sound quality may be up and down a little bit on this podcast, but it might speak to the dire nature of it a little bit more so. Scott has family in Houma, Louisiana. I can't remember the exact place where you live now, but they have been back and forth because of the hurricane. And so we have him on here. So they're driving back to some in-laws' house in Valdosta, Georgia. So we may be getting a little interference here and there, but we're certainly glad that you're joining us, Scott.
Okay, so we live in a small town called Destrehan, Louisiana. It is 23 miles upriver from New Orleans and probably about 2 miles south of Norco, Louisiana. Norco is where a lot of the nation's oil and gas is refined and turned from a raw product into oil that would go in your car or gasoline. Natural gas is processed there, so natural gas obviously provides heat to your home. It can provide power to your clothes dryer or your water heater. So Norco is very important not only to Louisiana but to the nation.
So the place you're from is pretty important to not just, and that may answer a little bit of one of our questions, Travis, where Will said, all these different storms that you guys go through, and people keep going back. People keep going back to Louisiana, but there's some pretty important things in Louisiana, as difficult of the weather that you have to deal with is.
Yeah, that's true. And really, it started with our fishing communities. So, oil and gas is a big thing, but also our fishing communities provide a lot of food that we eat on the table. We get it fresh. You guys generally get it flash frozen a day later or so. But so that's kind of where it starts. But yeah, the oil and gas, we have a huge chemical industry in the New Orleans area as well. So, if those plants go down, there's supply issues like we went through with COVID, and we're still going through with COVID. So naturally, when your demand peaks and your supply is low, the prices rise. Dow Chemical is a big employer where I'm at. DuPont is a big employer. Bayer, you think of Bayer aspirin, but Bayer is actually a chemical company as well that has a presence. So it's not only is it that the people are resilient, but it's a necessity to have some people run those plants.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, none of us want to lose the jambalaya and gumbo and all that good stuff either.
You got that right.
Yeah, we want to hang on to that. So as a lead-in question, and we'll kind of ask at the stages of this whole thing. So you guys don't want to necessarily think about next time. But when we hear, of things like this coming, is there something that we can do leading up to the event that would help lighten the load for some of you folks that are living through it? We get news weeks ahead. Hey, this is coming. Is there some way? I know there's Churches of Christ, disaster relief, things like that.
Right.
Is there some way we can help on the front end prior to the storm? And if so, what would you suggest?
Yeah, so that's a great question. My wife and I, Laura, we were discussing that today. There's, in our opinion, there would be 3 stages of a disaster, and I think this would apply to really any disaster, not just hurricanes. So the first one would be the aftermath. The second one would be the cleanup. And then the third one would be the recovery or the reestablishment, getting back to normal would be number 3. And so to address the first issue, it would be the best way to do it would be to have a truck full of food and fuel and water ready to go. Now, where that would be staged would be dependent on, in the scenario of a hurricane, it would be dependent upon how close you can get without the truck itself being in danger, or the truck driver being in danger. So that would be the first thing. You have to remember when you're going through the aftermath, you're assessing your property damage. You are assessing what you have left. And in some cases, you're assessing whether or not you should continue to stay where you're at. A lot of people, depending on where they live, and by that I mean inside the levee protection or outside the levee protection, they've chosen to stay. But then in the situation that we find ourselves with Hurricane Ida, the aftermath in some way is worse than the actual storm. Case in point, for this hurricane, we are projected to be without power for about a month. Most hurricanes, you should be prepared to be without power or basic utilities for a week. So we're going 4 times the norm. So I guess it's a long-winded answer of saying food, water, fuel being pre-staged somewhere, because give it 2 days to 5 days. That's when the National Guard starts coming in, the Red Cross starts coming in. So, trying to keep a spiritual focus in on this, the first 2 to 3 days in the immediate aftermath, people are not going to be ready to be taught the gospel. They're just trying to get over what just happened to them and assess where they are.
Well, that's a time of shock. It's like anything else. I mean, you're going through the shock of you've lost property. You might have lost loved ones. You may have lost pets. I mean, who knows? There's all sorts of things that could be happening there. So probably not the time to try to help them make big decisions, but certainly a time to influence them and show them love, show them care, show them respect.
Yes, exactly.
So how many of these have you been through personally, Scott?
I can't count. I mean, the biggest one, the first big one that I can remember as a kid was 92 with Hurricane Andrew. Of course, everybody remembers Homestead, Florida being completely flattened, but that ended up hitting the Houma area as well. the South Terrebonne Church of Christ in Montague, Louisiana was started as a result of the hurricane relief efforts. And so Montague is south of Houma if you're looking on a map, and there's about 30 members or so down there.
Okay.
So I don't know. I'd have to count, but you have to realize with a hurricane, you get plenty of notice. It's not like a tornado.
Right.
You get days of notice, and every year the technology gets better.
Yeah.
So you can kind of wait and see what your plan is going to be before you actually go through with your plan.
Just wanted to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about one of our sponsors, M2Y. The Ministering to Youth Conference is located at the Mainstay Suites in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee on November the 4th through the 7th. If you want a place where you'll be surrounded by youth ministers, elders, deacons, preachers, youth volunteers, and parents, all with a common goal of helping today's youth, then this is the place for you. This year's theme is Renew. The keynote speakers are Dan Chambers and Spencer Furby, along with several other class teachers who will be teaching on subjects like self-care, navigating culture, technology, mental health, and so much more. If you're interested in this, go to m2yconference.com to register, or you can go to benandtravis.com/m2y for more information. We hope to see you there this year. What made it so different than maybe some of the ones, even Katrina, sort of came through, made landfall, and just kind of cut a path. But this one, I think Ida kind of sat there for a while. Is that right?
Yeah, it sat. So my house had, as best as we can tell, the eye wall went right over my house. So think of when your sink or your toilet or your bathtub is draining, you have that counterclockwise motion going down. Well, the eye is that center part of that drain where you've got a hole there. You could put your finger in there. That's the eye.
Yeah.
And the eye wall is where that water is twisting around.
Yeah.
So we had 100-mile-an-hour winds or more going over my area for about 6 hours.
Wow.
Generally, it's a lot faster than that. Now, the entire hurricane event generally lasts about 24 hours. It just keeps moving. But this one sat, it zigzagged, and there was just a lot of wind with it. So that would be the big difference between Ida and Katrina, is just the amount of wind that we had to deal with.
Wow.
Those people that stayed behind in this particular case in my area, every one of them had said that they wish they had left. Not so much, I mean, the power of the hurricane itself was one thing, but being without water, being without electricity, and being without sewage for 4 weeks is a really long time to go. Now, fortunately, they hooked up the water about 10 days later. So we have running water, although they tell us we need to boil it in order to drink it. But we're not scheduled to have electricity until September 29 at the earliest. I've heard October 7 at the latest. And the big thing about power being so important is just for everything that we do in a daily life. So a lot of us have transitioned to using debit cards, right, when we buy stuff. But without power, whether that's regular power that we have or generator power, can't use a debit card.
Sure.
And without having power for that long, you can't go to a bank to withdraw cash because they don't have power. So it's just this one is a little different than Katrina, and in some ways it's a little worse.
So with the recovery efforts or the cleanup efforts, that's when you see a lot of people coming down to help.
Yes, I mean that's right. There's people that have come down already. A lot of people are feeding the linemen. So we have linemen from Pennsylvania. We've seen linemen from Canada. We have police officers from the Panhandle of Florida.
I think I saw some New York police officers there on some videos earlier today.
Yeah, that's right. So there are people that are here feeding those guys. We have something called the Cajun Navy, which was just a bunch of ragtag guys that came together after Katrina to get people out of floodwaters. That's turned into a nonprofit. So they're here.
That's cool.
Feeding people every day and giving out. There's people giving out ice every day. So there are some people here. The most affected areas are going to be St. Charles Parish, Lafourche Parish, Terrebonne Parish, St. John Parish, St. John the Baptist Parish, Ascension Parish. So really, you've got, say, Destrehan in the east. You've got probably Homa in the west, and then north to Baton Rouge. That area is still, I would say, probably still in the aftermath. The other thing, too, to keep in mind with the power situation is there are 8 major transmission lines that come into the city of New Orleans to feed the city with power. Several of those, I think it's 4, cross the Mississippi River between Avondale, Louisiana, and Jefferson, Louisiana, or Elmwood, Louisiana. And they're quite tall towers because they have to allow cargo ships to travel underneath them. The tower on the west bank in Avondale literally fell over. So the electric lines were in the river, and they had to blow them to clear the river. So that's the big reason why we have such an issue with power right now.
Wow.
Well, if there's one thing that I can say about Louisiana folks is resiliency. They have a ton of resiliency, and obviously you've got that in your DNA. And that's the one thing there's plenty of things we love about the Keisers, but that's certainly one of them that stands out. I know that's kind of maybe a difficult thing to balance. You've got all these people around you that you want to help, but it's kind of one of those deals where, well, we have to get help too, so that we can help others. It's kind of like on the airplane, you got to put the oxygen mask on your face first before you can help others. What are some ways that we can help? Are there some, websites that we can donate money to that you trust, that you think do a good job? I know a lot of times there are people out there who will run scams and stuff like that through this, unbelievably so. But are there some things that you trust that we could donate to? Is there a way to get money to you or someone, your family, that can help them, but also help others as well?
We're working on that. We have separate hurricane accounts where I worship the Hickory Knoll Church of Christ in Harahan, Louisiana. We have a hurricane account set up. I'll send you that information if I can get it, and
great.
then you can share that. The Hollywood Road Church of Christ in Homa, where my dad Randy is one of the elders there, they set up a hurricane account as well. But I'll get that information and share it with you guys. There's also the Gonzales congregation in Gonzales, Louisiana, has been very helpful.
And so I know there'll be groups coming down. Our congregation and some others are talking about coming down. Just a couple of pointers or tips that you might give people who may be heading that way. And I know there's already been some groups that have gone that way.
Right. Well, for this particular situation, if you come, you need to make sure that you have your own lodging. The reason is because we have, in my county or my parish where I live, there are about 22,000 homes. I think that's about right. And our parish president has said that every structure in the parish has sustained some sort of damage, from catastrophic to minor. Well, my situation obviously would qualify as catastrophic. So, not to be ugly or passé about the issue, but there's several of us that are now competing for places to stay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're competing for places to stay. The linemen that are coming in and repairing the power are competing for places to stay. And then those that are coming in to help are going to have to compete for places to stay. So until, we get into early October, you need to be prepared to have a travel trailer or some sort of arrangements to live. You need to have plenty of water for when you actually work in the the areas that you're working in, and you need to make sure that you have plenty of ice. And then food, there's food around, there's food available, but it's on a limited basis, and we're still in a curfew. So the curfew is 8 o'clock. And remember that there are no lights on at night. So every intersection is a four-way stop, but it's still very, very dark. It's an issue of limited manpower as well. Those that are a little more wealthy have gone because they can afford to be somewhere else for an extended period of time. And as I mentioned before, those that have stayed because of the conditions that we have wish they had left. So there's a lot of issues going on and limited manpower to help those coming in. So, if you have a group that's coming in, don't be disappointed if you have a hard time working with the members of the local congregation. It's not that we don't want to help and that we don't have a desire to help those around us. We've just been personally affected too.
Yeah, I think that's huge to keep in mind, because so many times on mission trips, we think about going in, and we've done this in Homa. We've stayed at your parents' house, we've stayed
Right.
at members' houses, and that was one thing that our secretary here reminded us. Hey, there's not going to be a place to stay. You're either going to be in a tent, you're going to be in a camper, you're going to be, if you do find somebody's house to stay in, it may not be in a great, condition. So you've got to be aware of those things as you go in. And I think that's huge. Or you're going to be staying a few hours away and driving in.
That's right. And it was, just so you know, it was 92 degrees today with a heat index of 105.
And that's not pleasant in a tent, I'll tell you that.
No, it's not. So I would like to just share a couple of thoughts about maybe some do's and don'ts when it comes to Christians, especially interacting with non-Christians. But some of this stuff would apply too with Christians. A few do's that I came up with. Number one would be to pray. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5:17, we read that we need to be praying without ceasing. And then provide comfort so that we can comfort and edify one another. This is a rough time for some people more than others. And they're going to need your sympathy and your empathy. So that would be a couple of spiritual things. Another practical thing is for those that may move to our area in the future. When you have a hurricane, make sure that you have a week's worth of supplies in your home, because this is an exception. Most hurricanes, we're without power for a couple of days and we're back on. And you can fill your bathtub up with water before the hurricane hits, so you have a source of water. And then be careful how you share. So do share God's blessings with others, but especially in a situation like this, be careful how much you share, because if you are so generous that you have shared everything you have, now you've become a burden on other people. So you just have to be careful how you share God's blessings with others. And then pay attention to your government officials. Most of the local officials are in touch with what's going on. And, we may disagree with some of the decisions that they make, but the information about what's going on is definitely important to know.
Yeah.
So that's just some do's. Here's some don'ts. Don't blame God for this. This isn't God picking on South Louisiana or the Gulf Coast or anything else like this. Those of you that have experienced tornadoes or earthquakes, those are natural disasters too. Don't blame God for this. Isaiah 55 and verse 9, we know that his thoughts are not our thoughts, and our ways are not his ways, and his ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than ours. He knows what's going on when we don't. And we also remember that Jesus tells us that God will send the rain, that is his blessings, on the just and the unjust, from Matthew chapter 5. So God wants to bless all of his creation, not just Christians alone, although we have that special relationship with him. And then we learn in the book of Job, we learn that God has set certain natural processes in motion for the earth to work. We know that from science, hurricanes, as bad as they are, they actually cool the earth down. And so some of these processes are difficult to understand. They were difficult for Job to understand. So gird yourself like a man and get ready, because if you question God too much, you're going to get more than what you asked for. And then another thought I had is that some natural disasters like earthquakes, they might be the result of the earth growing old. We know that from Psalm chapter 102 that the earth will grow old like a garment. And so the plates are shifting, and that's just part of the earth growing old in some cases. So don't blame God for any of this.
Well, the reality is a bunch of the destruction and death and all the things that we have to live with are the result of fallen mankind. So, it sets some processes into motion. And so you're right. It's not God's fault in those things.
Right. And then the final thought I had on that was, I was reading Proverbs chapter 30 and about David and all of that stuff. And we learned that joy comes in the morning. It's going to be a long night for those of us that have to gut our houses. It's going to be a long, long night, but eventually joy will come in the morning. We'll be able to set our foot in that brand new interior of our house and relax a little.
That's awesome, man. I'm looking forward to that day for you guys.
Before we wrap up, I did want to get a little story time. We didn't mention in the intro that Scott and Ben and I all went to Freed-Hardeman University together. Scott and I, actually after Ben and I were roommates, Scott and I were roommates, which I'm still not sure Freed-Hardeman University has gotten over just yet. But there are a lot of good stories. But Scott, if you've got maybe one Freed-Hardeman story.
Yeah, I'll share the one about the vacuum cleaner. Y'all remember the vacuum cleaner incident?
I'm not sure. I'm afraid to ask.
Yeah. So I'm guessing this was midnight, 1 o'clock. I don't know. I'm sleeping. I guess I was tired or something, and I went to bed early for a weekend. It was either a Friday or a Saturday night. And I'm in Farrow Hall with Travis. And I don't know if Travis, you were in the room at that point or not. I don't remember. Anyway, the dorm door flies open and somebody's yelling, "Scott, come help, or something to that, right? And so I run several rooms down the hallway to Nathan Haar's room and Andy Johnson's room, and there's literally a vacuum cleaner tied to a rope in the on position, making this awful noise right outside of the window. I was really enjoying my nap at the time and was not really in my full state of mind yet. So for whatever reason, I thought this was a good idea. I didn't want to get shocked, and everybody else wanted the noise to stop. So I put my hand in somebody's sock. It wasn't mine. Grabbed a pair of scissors, and I cut the power cord so it stopped. By that time, there's a group of guys in the room, and making the vacuum cleaner stop is no longer enough. So we end up pulling the vacuum cleaner free from the second or third floor, and it's now in the room. And all of a sudden, it gets chunked into the parking lot between Farrow and Benson Hallway. Yeah. And then, I don't know if you guys know this, but later on, I was approached by one of the guys that had lowered the vacuum cleaner down if I would help him pay for the vacuum cleaner, to which I responded with an emphatic no.
I love how things like that happen and everybody goes, "Hey, we got to get Scott Keiser on this." That just makes
right.
all the sense in the world. If you know Scott and you get to know him, he's the guy. If you want something fixed quick, you get Scott to come in, and
he'll ask questions later.
That's right.
He'll ask for forgiveness later, maybe. Well, we hope the problems that you have in Louisiana are solved quickly and easily as the vacuum problem was. But I know that it might not be that simple for you guys.
Yeah, it's gonna take some time. But if you guys have me on again, maybe I'll tell you the story of the snowball bed next time.
Well, I mean, I think that pretty much seals it that you got to come back on. But
yeah,
Scott, we certainly appreciate you taking time, especially pulling over on your long trip to Valdosta. We appreciate your wife, Laura, manning the wheel while you take time to be with us. We certainly love y'all. We appreciate what you mean to the kingdom of God. And we hope to see you soon and in better circumstances for sure. But thanks for being on.
No problem. Just trying to do my part. Love you guys.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.